We've been looking at an atmosphere for miracles. Now let's drill down on the practical foundation for that atmosphere and see what we can do to begin to see God's presence manifest. We're going to look at Isaiah chapter 6 today and see what starts the atmosphere for miracles. So first of all, we're going to look at what is going on. So Isaiah 6, I'm going to start with just this first verse. 6:1 says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." And I just want to stop right there. Let's just look at what's going on. King Uzziah had started out as a king. He became king at, I think, 16, ruled for 52 years. That's kind of a while. He started off very, godly in his ruling, etc. And then he decided to go into the temple and do some of the sacrificial things himself instead of using the priests. And he was struck with leprosy. And so here we have this king who's been there for a long time. He was not ruling at the time he died. He'd stepped down. His son was ruling. I believe it was his son. And he had been stepped down for a while, but he died. So this king died, and so that creates this kind of strange situation in the world there, in the Jewish kingdom, if you will. And he was the 10th king, and we could talk about the significance numerically of 10 and an idea of completeness or what have you. But the fact is, the king had died, so there's a little bit of turbulence and a little bit of unrest associated with that. And Isaiah says, "In the year that King Uzziah died," so that's his marker, "I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." So when you read this, and I'm actually reading from, I believe this is the New King James Version, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, New King James Version. If you read the True King James Version, you'll find that there's that he refers to the fact that he saw him high and lifted up, and also lifted up is what it says, high and also lifted up, and I want to talk about that for a minute, because the idea relayed when he says that, or when it's written that way, is that he sees him high, lifted up, and this is like a flag. It's like a sentinel. It's like a marker. It's like a point to see, something you would commemorate or point to and say, "Yep, there's that moment." Okay, so all these things are going on, and then Isaiah comes and he sees something that is a sentinel or a flag moment for him. Okay, and it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. So high is an elevated, above, at the top. And then he says, so I saw him on his throne high and lifted up. In other words, even more so, again, bringing recognition and attention, that idea again of that flag moment. And we're going to see that all the way through this lesson today, that this is kind of that marker, flag, sentinel moment, commemorative moment, if you will. And it's important in the grand scheme of our lesson. And so it says that he was high and lifted up, and the train of his robe, could be the hem of his robe, but his robe, the hem, the following, kind of like when a woman gets married and has on a wedding dress, and we talk about her train, that's the part of the dress that follows and, is long and lengthy. And so referring to his robe, the train of his robe filled the temple. And this idea of filled is to fill up. That's part of it. but also it's the idea of consecrate. The train of his robe consecrated the temple. Okay? Consecrated the temple. In other words, it made it purified. It made it holy. The train of his robe made it holy. That's what he's seeing as it's filled up. It's that. But again, part of the word here that's used goes to this word also that I referred to before in the King James, which is translated as like a flag or commemorative or sentinel moment. So it says that he was high and lifted up, and his train filled, consecrated the temple, and it was a marker or sentinel moment. Okay? Something you could look, that happened. Okay? And this is important because I referred to Uzziah, who had done things out of order. What he had done was something that was a duty that was consecrated to the priest to do, and he had just basically said, hey, I could do this myself. And there was a consequence for him for that. But now we find Isaiah sitting here, and the king has died, and Isaiah sees the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, lifted up in the temple, his train filling the temple and consecrating the temple and setting things back in order and making it right. And it's a sentinel moment. So we've now got two things that have been happening as kind of sentinel moments in Isaiah's situation. Just the fact that he saw this is one, and then the fact that this temple is consecrated, that's two, and it's dealing with some of that stuff. And what I want to get across in this first part of this lesson is simply this. God's presence is not intimidated by man. We talked a few weeks ago about, the place where Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And people have said, well, that's because God can't look on sin. And that just irritates me, because God can look on anything. Sin can't afford to have God look at it. Right? They say, well, God can't be in the presence of sin. No. Sin can't be in the presence of God. Get it right. Okay? It's the reality is God's presence is not intimidated by man. In the original sin in the garden, Adam sinned and hid himself. The presence of God came into the garden, walking into the garden, and said, Adam, where are you? Was God unable to look on Adam because he had sinned? No, that wasn't the problem. Adam was hiding from God because he knew he had sin. Right? People get upset with Christianity not because God can't deal with their situation, but because they're uncomfortable when they recognize their sin. And the second thing that I want to bring out in this is God's ability to move is not stifled by problems. We have excuses for everything. We have reasons for why everything doesn't work. We have things that we look at and we say, this is the only way this could happen. And it's because that's all we can figure out in our mind. But God's not hampered by our problems. I had a friend who was just one of the most creative people I've ever known. And he could, if it was something mechanical, he could think it up, he could build it, he could do it. It didn't matter if it was wood, metal, plastic, it just didn't matter. He could do it, whatever. And I loved to talk to him about things I was having difficulty with or problems, because he would figure out how to solve it. And if it required a tool, he'd make it. He was just that kind of a person. And God is on that in the same way on a much grander scale. I mean, we look at it and go, well, there's no way we could do this. There's not a way to get there from here. And God's a way maker. He comes up with a way. You say, well, there's no way that someone can be healed from that. And God just heals them anyway. Why? Because he created them in the first place. Well, they need a new heart? I could do that. That's what God says. They need a new whatever. I can make one. Right? his ability to move is not stifled by our problems. So that's the first thing I want to look at is what's going on here. What's going on is all of this stuff we just talked about. And then it says that in verse 2, above it stood seraphim. He's talking about the throne in the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and 2 he covered his feet. And with 2 he flew, and one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. And then I want to really drill down here on verse 5. Isaiah says, So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And I want to look at that for a minute, because there's a transformation that starts to take place here. And it begins with this. Woe is me. Woe is a word that it's related to desire. It's related to those things that we're motivated by, those desires and things that we want to do. And then he says, Woe is me. In other words, there's a transformation in that first 3 words that Isaiah speaks. There is a transformation that has begun to happen within Isaiah. There's a transformation with regards to his desires. My dad used to say, people say, well, you can't be a Christian because there's all these things you can't do. You can't do what you want to do because you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this other thing. And he said, I always tell them, I can do anything I desire, but God changed my desires. And that's what Isaiah is saying here when he says, woe is me. My desires are changing. What I thought I wanted is starting to change. And then he says, for I am undone. And I am undone has a lot of different little sub-meanings to it, but essentially it means this: I am brought to silence. My desires have changed and I am shut up. I got nothing to say about this right at the moment. And he goes on, because the reason why I am a man of unclean lips. Unclean is defiled lips, not consecrated. And he actually goes on, and I'm going to come back to this, but he actually goes on and says, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. In other words, he says, my lips have been defiled, and I'm surrounded by other people in the same boat. See, part of this transformation that's starting to happen here within Isaiah is the recognition of what's going on around him too. First, he comes to his own place where he realizes, hey, my desires are changing. And then he's brought to silence and he realizes, oh man, I'm unclean and the people around me are unclean. Why? Because he's seen God. Because he's seen the Lord. He's seen the King, the true King. And lips is a representative of a couple things, one of which is boundaries. It's a boundary. But it's also vain words. So Isaiah is going, okay, look, my desires are changed. I'm brought to silence. My boundaries aren't clear, and my words are unclean. The things I'm saying are pointless, and they're vain. The people around me are in the same boat. And he says, for my eyes have seen the King. For my eyes also, this comes down to this idea of vision, right? So, well, that makes sense, Dan. Your eyes, vision, of course. But also your vision as your long-term perspective. In other words, maybe your goals. He sees something different. My vision of things is changed because of my seeing the King. It's all of a sudden it's making sense, but in a different way than it did before. It's not lining up with what my stupid, vain thoughts were. All of a sudden I realize there's more to it than what I thought. And again, this word incorporates the idea of also, or that flag or sentinel moment. So he says, woe is me. I'm brought to silence. I recognize my situation. I recognize my surroundings. I recognize my boundaries. I recognize how vain my words are. I recognize my vision has been from a wrong perspective. And this is another sentinel moment. This is another flagship moment when I say, oh, that's something I can point back to. That's when it all changed. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts, the King of kings. So, at this point, Isaiah is going through a transformation. It's a sudden transformation. It goes along the lines of, you'll never be the same again. This is that sentinel moment. 3 things we've talked about now related to that sentinel moment. And so this is transformative for Isaiah. And it says in verse 6, then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it, and said, behold, this has touched your lips, your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is purged. This live coal. Now, there's some discussion back and forth about where this live coal comes from. The altar of incense being one of the ideas that this coal came from the altar of incense. That's in the temple. That's where Isaiah would probably have been standing closest to. The altar of incense. It's an altar. That's where things are sacrificed. That's where atonement is made. We've been talking all throughout this series about the importance of a right relationship with Christ. When we want to create an atmosphere for miracles, we need to have a right perspective, a right relationship going on, a right heart, if you will. So the altar of incense is key to that. And the altar of incense is reminiscent of prayer. Miracles come out of prayer. Miracles come when our prayer is as incense going up before God. The power of prayer is extremely important. As I said before, the altar is also that place of purification. So, you may wonder, when we have people come forward for salvation, we have them say the sinner's prayer or a prayer of salvation. That's part of the purifying process. But here's Isaiah, and the seraphim brings this live coal. And a live coal is one that's still on fire. And a live coal is basically a hot rock, if you will, one that's on fire. Of course, Christ is our rock. He's our Redeemer. He's our purifier. He's our salvation. The angel or the seraphim comes and touches his lips with this hot live coal. This isn't a coal that's, gotten cold. It's still in the fire. It's still capable of purification. It says it's touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away and your sin is purged. It's touched your boundaries. And they're changed. It's touched your words and they're changed. We want to have our words be charged with power from God. But sometimes that's going to burn a little. When we want to be in that place, we have to let God purify our words. We have to let God put the relevance to our words. Our words all by themselves are vain. If we want to have God anoint us, if we want to have those things happen, we need to let God provide the words. We need to let God provide the purification of those words. Let God provide the motivation of those words. Let God provide the sentinel moment to those words. When God's word goes forth, it's powerful. Your iniquity is taken away and your sin is purged. And then in verse 8 it says, also, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? See, when we get in a place where we recognize the end of us and our need for him, which is what is going on in this transformative moment, is Isaiah is recognizing how little import he is to the equation and how extremely important God is to the equation, how extremely important the altar of God, the throne room of God, the presence of God is to all of these things. If I get lost in myself, then I start doing what seems right to me. And I start telling other people, well, this is what you need to do because this is what I think is right. And my words become vain. God sometimes uses simple, God sometimes uses foolish things to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And he does it because he's God. And he can do whatever he knows is right. And we can get caught up in how we think things need to be and how we think things need to go together. But what we really need to do is recognize what God's doing. And as we get in a place where we start to recognize our situation, where we allow God to reach out and touch us, consecrate us, and prepare us to do what he wants to do, then we can hear. Because that's the first thing that happens is Isaiah says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying. I heard the voice of the Lord saying, speaking. My ears were opened. I was able to hear. I was able to comprehend and understand what he was saying. And what he hears him saying is, whom shall I send? Now, I believe God was saying that long before Isaiah heard it. Because his desire is to reach out to the people. Whom shall I send and who will go for us? Who's the person that's going to go? And just a moment ago, Isaiah is like, wow, I am undone. I don't have words that I can even speak because they're just vain and my boundaries are messed up. And now he hears the voice of the Lord. What happened was this purification. What happened was this encounter. What happened was that transformation, that realization of his need for God to intervene on his behalf. When he recognizes that, when he has the coal touch his lips, then he hears the voice of God saying these things, and his response is this. Then I said, here am I. Send me. Let me speak your words. Let me do what you want done. That's the consequence of his encounter. That's where he's at. He's gone from, I'm undone, I can't speak, my words are vain, to, you know what, send me, I'll go. Why? Because there's something that happened. There's a transformation that happened. What's happened in Isaiah's experience here is that his faith has come in contact with the fire of God. His faith has been fired up. When we want to see God move, we want to create that atmosphere for miracles. We need to allow for our faith to be fired up. We need to allow for God to move in our midst and fire us up and not look at all the circumstances around us and say, oh, it's hopeless and it's all undone. Woe is me. But instead, be listening for God's voice, be allowing God to touch our lips with those hot coals and live coals, and be able to hear what God's saying and say, you know what, send me, I'll do it. I'm ready to be obedient to what you want to do, God. I'm listening and I'm ready to speak. And I'm also ready to shut up if that's what I need to do. But we got to be in that place where our vision changes, where our hearing is opened up, where we start seeing God's vision, not our vision. Oh God, if you would just do this and this and this and this and this. Well, that's with my vision. But maybe God's vision's different. And when I get in a place where I can hear God saying, then I can say, I'll do it. I'm ready. Whatever you need, God, I'm here to do that. We get caught up in who gets the credit. Who's going to get recognized as being the most spiritual or the most whatever? And what we need to be focused on is, what is God saying? What is God's vision? And how much I need to get out of the way. I don't need to be there. I don't know if you've ever been around a politician or a celebrity where they're constantly looking for the camera. They're constantly looking for the person that they can be seen with. They're constantly looking for that moment that makes them look so good, you know? It's sad. And some of that has filtered into the churches over the years, where it's all about, you know, how I can make it look good, right? How I can look good. How I can promote, you know, I've got my new book out, or whatever it is. I'm old. I grew up with, you know, records and CDs and stuff like that, you know. But that's not what it's about. It's about letting the live coal touch our lips, which comes from recognition of just how undone we are without God. I want to create an atmosphere for miracles. And the first thing I got to do in that process is get out of the way. When I can get out of the way and let God, when I can get out of the way and move all the junk out of the way and listen and hear God and speak what he gives me to say, and shut up when he tells me to shut up, then I can see the atmosphere for miracles start to happen. I don't have to worry about anything. I just have to let my faith reach out. And it's not that I have to sit there and reach out and make up what I want to have happen, but I can pray, not my will, but thine be done. I can pray and say, God, I know what I want in this situation, but that's not important. Woe is me for even going there. I want what you want, God. I want to know what you want to do in this situation. I want to hear your voice, and then I want to respond to that. When our heart is turned so that our faith becomes fired up by doing what God wants, the author and finisher of our faith, Christ, when I am fired up to see the will of the Father done on earth as it is in heaven, then I have created, within my being, I have created an atmosphere to allow God to fire up my faith and use me to do what he wants to do. I need to reach that point of transformation. I need to reach that point where I set aside all of me and I let God, you've got everything I've got, and I just want more of you. I want all of you, God. Then I've created the scenario for him to be able to move through me and do miracles, for his presence to be manifest. Most people in any situation are just trying to get by. And church, unfortunately, it does not get a pass on that. But if you're going to minister, if you're a minister, if you're an altar worker, a preacher, whatever, if you're going to minister, you need to get to this place with God so that you can minister to those that need God. Those that need a miracle, those that need to see the manifest presence of God. That's where we need to get to. So I know this kind of challenges you today, but I want us to look at what I need to do to fire up my faith, what I need to do to bring myself to that place where my eyes are open, my ears are open. And the biggest step along that way is to get myself out of the way. So that's the challenge for you today. Let God transform you. Let him fire up your faith. And that's it for today.